I was 9 years old when I learned that home could be the most dangerous place in the world. It is strange how a child can sense when something is wrong, even without fully understanding it. The morning began like any other in our small Kansas house. The smell of fresh coffee filled the kitchen, and the golden light of the early sun slipped through the thin curtains, casting soft patterns on the worn wooden table. My mother hummed quietly as she moved about, her back to me, and for a moment it all seemed normal, safe even. But deep down, in the quiet space between my heartbeats, there was already a shadow. It started with the way silence fell too quickly in certain rooms, the way conversation stopped when I entered, the way I would catch a glance exchanged between two adults. So fast it could have been missed, but so heavy it felt like a stone dropping in water. My body began to react before my mind could put it into words. My stomach would tighten for no reason. I would listen for footsteps when there should have been none. My hands would fidget with the hem of my dress until the threads came loose. I did not know what to call it then, but now I know it was fear. The walls of that house were thin, yet they held secrets so thick they seemed to change the air. The hall smelled faintly of dust and something older, something stale, like air trapped for years in a closed box. At night, when the wind pressed against the windows, the house groaned softly. I would pull my blanket up to my chin and try to convince myself it was just the wood settling. But the truth was, I was already on guard. My ears strained to hear the sound of the front door, the creak of the floorboards, the low murmur of voices when everyone was supposed to be asleep. Children are taught to trust the people in their home. They are told these are the ones who will protect you, guide you, love you. That was the story my teachers told me at school, the story my friends seemed to live. But in my house, I learned the opposite. I learned that smiles could hide cruelty, that kindness could be a trap, and that sometimes the person who says they care the most is the one who will hurt you the deepest. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned the color of rust, I sat on the back steps watching dust float in the light. It was a small, quiet moment, the kind that children should remember for its simplicity. But all I can remember is the sudden cold in my chest when I heard my name called from inside. Just my name. Soft, almost gentle, but it froze me where I sat. I remember the taste of iron in my mouth, the way my fingers dug into the peeling paint of the step. I remember how slowly I stood up, as if buying myself a few seconds before I had to go in. Fear at that age is different from fear as an adult. It is raw, without logic, built from instinct and the tiniest of clues. I noticed the way his voice would lower when we were alone. I noticed how the air felt heavier when he was in the room, as if there was less space to breathe. I noticed how my mother's eyes would look past me, fixed on nothing when I tried to catch her gaze. There was a silence between us that spoke louder than any words. I began to count time differently, not in hours or days, but in the moments between his presence and absence. The mornings when he was gone were lighter, my chest looser. The evenings when the sound of his car in the driveway reached my ears was suffocating. My heart would pound in my throat as if trying to escape before the rest of me could. I became an expert in reading the smallest signs. The way the front door closed told me what kind of night it would be. The rhythm of his footsteps told me if he was tired or angry. The pause before he spoke my name told me if I would be able to sleep that night or not at all. Sometimes, when I was alone in my room, I would pretend I lived somewhere else. I would imagine a place where my bed was not a trap, where the sound of footsteps in the hallway meant someone coming to tuck me in, not to take away my safety. I would imagine laughter that didn't make my skin crawl and hugs that didn't make me hold my breath. But the sound of the floorboard outside my door always pulled me back to reality. It is easy for people to say a child should speak up, that they should tell someone. What they do not understand is how quickly the world can teach you that your voice does not matter. Every time I tried to push the words to my lips, they felt heavy, like they were made of stone. And somewhere in my 9-year-old mind, I already knew that saying them out loud would change everything. So I stayed silent. I smiled when I was told to. I said I was fine when anyone asked. I let the days pass one by one, each carrying its own small wound, and in the quiet moments, when the light was fading and the house was holding its breath, I began to understand the truth that would shape the rest of my life. Trust is not given freely. Sometimes it is not given at all. And sometimes, the people who should protect you are the very ones you must protect yourself from. My name is Helen Grace Matthews, and at 72 years old, I live in a small town tucked away in the quiet heart of Kansas. On the surface, my life is simple. I am the lady in the floral apron at the Saturday farmer's market who sells homemade pies and cakes. People greet me with warm smiles and say things like, "Helen, you have the best apple pie in the county." I chat about the weather or the new church roof, and I always remember to ask about their grandchildren. To them, I am a picture of contentment, but what they see is only the surface of a life built over decades to hide what I have endured. My little house sits at the edge of town where the cornfields begin. In the early morning, I can hear the wind moving through the tall stalks like a whisper. The sun rises slow over the horizon, spilling light into my kitchen, where the scent of cinnamon often hangs in the air. I keep my counters clean and my cupboards full. People think these small rituals are just part of my baking, but they are much more than that. They are my way of keeping order in a world that once felt like chaos. Every pie crust I roll out is a quiet act of defiance against the years when I had no control at all. I chose this town because it is the kind of place where everyone knows each other, yet no one asks too many questions. Strangers passing through see the old brick buildings on Main Street, the rusty sign above the diner, and the single gas station, and think there is nothing remarkable here. But for me, the stillness is a kind of safety. There are no unexpected knocks on the door, no footsteps in the hallway that I did not invite. The people here know me as I have chosen to be known, and that is a rare kind of power. Sometimes I catch myself in the reflection of the bakery window when I'm delivering pies, and I wonder if anyone can see the truth in my eyes. Years of living with a secret changes a person. It teaches you to hold your shoulders a certain way, to control the movement of your hands to keep your voice steady, even when your chest feels like it is caving in. People think age is what makes your eyes tired, but I know it is something else. It is the weight of memories that never fade, no matter how far you run or how many years you survive. There are days when the market is busy and laughter echoes off the buildings that I allow myself to feel almost normal. I watch children run between the stalls, their cheeks red from the wind, and I remember what it was to be that small before I learned the lessons that shaped me. I do not resent them for their innocence, but I carry a quiet ache, knowing how quickly it can be stolen. My hands often tighten around the pie boxes when I think about it, but no one notices. To them, I am just steady-handed and careful. I have created a life that looks unremarkable because unremarkable is safe. I keep my home modest, my routines predictable, and my circle of trust very small. There are no loud arguments, no slammed doors, no voices raised in anger. I cannot stand the sound of sudden shouting even after all these years. It takes me back in an instant to a time when shouting meant something worse was coming. That is why I surround myself with quiet. My radio plays soft old country songs, my phone rarely rings, and I choose my visitors carefully. The truth is, I built this life the way a mason lays bricks one careful layer at a time, making sure every piece is strong enough to hold the weight of what came before. People think I am just naturally private, but privacy is not a preference for me. It is a shield. It is what allows me to smile at the market, to wave to the mailman, to sit in the front pew at church without feeling exposed. Behind that shield, I keep the parts of myself that the world would not understand. On Sunday mornings, I wear my best dress and walk to church along the same route every time. I know the cracks in the sidewalk by heart. The congregation sees me as a faithful woman, a steady presence who has attended for decades. They do not know that the reason I sit near the aisle is not for convenience, but because I like knowing I can leave quickly if I need to. It is a habit from long ago when escape routes were the difference between danger and safety. I have learned to speak in a way that reveals nothing while still making people feel I am listening. It is a skill I developed as a child when words could be used against me. Now it serves me in other ways. People tell me their troubles, their family disputes, their health worries, and I nod and listen without ever letting my own story slip through. There is a strange comfort in holding it close, where no one can touch it. The years have given me distance, but they have not erased the past. I still catch the faint scent of aftershave in a crowd and feel my breath catch. I still hear certain tones of voice and my muscles tense before I even think about it. Trauma has a way of living in the body long after the moment has passed. That is something people who have never lived it do not fully understand. You can rebuild, you can survive, but your body always remembers. From the outside, my life might seem small, but for me, every day in this quiet town is a victory. Every laugh I share at the market, every pie I place on a neighbor's table, every peaceful night I spend under my own roof is a reminder that I am no longer trapped in the life I once had. I have shaped this existence with intention piece by piece until it became something I could live in without fear. And yet even in the calm, I carry the knowledge of who I am and what I have endured. And that truth lives in me quietly, like a shadow that never fully fades. When I was a child, my world felt small and safe on the outside, yet there were cracks in its walls that only I seemed to notice. Our neighborhood was quiet, with neatly mowed lawns and mailboxes standing like sentinels in front of each house. People waved to one another from their porches and borrowed cups of sugar without hesitation. To the outside world, we were just another wholesome family in a neat little house. My father was a man people admired. He wore his reputation like a badge of honor. In town, he was greeted with firm handshakes and warm smiles. At church, his voice carried through the hymns, and people said he was a man whose word could be trusted. That is what everyone believed, and for a long time, I tried to believe it too. My mother was different. She was always composed. Her dresses pressed her hair set perfectly in place. She kept the house spotless to the point where a speck of dust felt like a crime. But there was a stiffness in her posture, a tension in the way she moved. She enforced rules with an iron hand, yet offered little warmth. Affection from her was rare and conditional, given only when it suited the image she wanted others to see. She was the type of woman who believed in keeping family matters private, no matter how ugly they became behind closed doors. In the beginning, the signs were small, almost invisible to anyone else. A lingering hand on my shoulder that made my skin prickle. A strange heaviness in the air when I was left alone with him. Words spoken in a voice softer than necessary that somehow made me feel cornered. I would hear my name said slowly in a way that made my stomach twist. It was nothing I could explain to anyone, not even to myself. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew that something about those moments was wrong. I started to notice patterns. He would appear in places I did not expect, like the hallway outside my room when I was getting ready for bed, or in the kitchen after everyone else had gone to sleep. His eyes would follow me in a way that felt heavy, not protective, but assessing, as if weighing something only he understood. When we were around others, he behaved like the perfect father, laughing easily, patting my shoulder, speaking to me as though nothing was unusual. It was the sharp shift between those two versions of him that frightened me the most. My mother seemed to notice more than she ever admitted. Sometimes she would walk into a room and her gaze would pass quickly between us, but she would say nothing. Her face would tighten for a moment before she went back to whatever she was doing. At first I thought maybe she did not see it clearly enough, but as I got older, I began to understand that she chose not to. Her silence was a choice, one that taught me my safety was not her priority. There were small moments when the tension bled into the simplest routines. Sitting at the dinner table, I would feel his gaze linger on me too long. When I walked past him in the hallway, I could feel the air shift as if he had leaned just slightly closer than he needed to. These were not accidents, and they were not my imagination. Each one was a quiet rehearsal for something worse. I learned early on to read the atmosphere in the house like other children read storybooks. The sound of the front door closing told me what kind of mood he was in. The heaviness of his footsteps on the stairs told me whether it was safe to be seen or if I should find a reason to disappear into my room. The smallest changes in his tone or the way he held his shoulders became warnings that guided every move I made. Even at school, I carried that tension. While other children laughed and ran freely, I kept part of myself locked away. I could be smiling one moment and suddenly freeze if a voice behind me sounded too much like his. I never invited friends over because I did not know how to explain the unease in my own home. I envied the way other kids spoke to their parents without fear, without calculating every word before they said it. Looking back, I see how those early experiences shaped the way I saw the world. I understood too soon that trust could be dangerous, that love could come with conditions, and that the people who were supposed to protect you could instead become the ones you needed to protect yourself from. That awareness settled into me like a shadow that I could not shake. The first time it crossed from subtle to undeniable is burned into my memory. It was late afternoon, the light fading to gold as I sat on the floor drawing with crayons. He entered the room without making a sound and stood behind me longer than anyone should. I felt his presence before I saw his shadow stretch across the paper. When I looked up, his expression was unreadable, but his eyes were not. They told me that the space between us no longer belonged to me. That was the moment I stopped pretending I did not know what was happening. From then on, every small gesture, every glance carried the weight of what I feared was coming. The change did not happen all at once. It came like the slow tightening of a rope, a little more each day, until I could hardly breathe without feeling its pull. What had started as unsettling glances and quiet moments of tension turned into something I could no longer mistake for anything else. He began to seek out moments when the house was empty or when my mother was distracted in another room. At first I thought it was coincidence, but the pattern was too precise. He knew the rhythms of our home better than anyone, and he used them against me. The kitchen was one of the first places that shifted from safe to dangerous. I used to love the smell of bread rising in the oven or the way the light poured in through the small window over the sink. But those details began to fade under the weight of new memories. The scrape of a chair being pulled across the tile would make my heart race. His presence would fill the space in a way that made the air feel heavy. He would lean too close under the excuse of reaching for something, or speak in a voice so low I could feel it more than hear it. I began to memorize the sound of his shoes on the floor, so I could avoid being caught there with him. The living room was no better. The place where I once curled up with my books or watched cartoons became another stage for his control. I remember one evening when the sun was dipping low and the shadows stretched long across the carpet. He sat in his chair pretending to read the newspaper, but his eyes followed my every movement. The sound of the paper crinkling in his hands was deliberate, like a signal to remind me he was watching. I would keep my eyes on the television, but my mind was already racing through ways to leave the room without drawing attention. He found ways to make me feel trapped even when we were not alone, a hand resting on my shoulder just a second too long in front of others. A whisper in my ear that no one else could hear. These gestures were invisible to anyone watching, but to me, they were warnings. They told me that no matter where I was, he could reach me. The objects in our home began to take on new meanings. The belt hanging on the back of the bedroom door was no longer just for holding up pants. The wooden spoon in the kitchen drawer was not only for stirring soup. Even the soft creak of a floorboard could send a jolt of fear through me. I learned to read these small details like signs in a language only I understood. The nights were the worst. When the rest of the world went quiet, the house seemed to amplify every sound. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock in the hallway, and then the footsteps. Slow, measured, deliberate. They would stop outside my door, and I would hold my breath, praying they would turn away. Sometimes they did, sometimes they did not. When fear becomes part of your daily life, it changes the way you move through the world. I stopped laughing loudly. I stopped speaking unless spoken to. I kept my eyes down and my hands busy because stillness or defiance could draw his attention. Even my breathing became quieter, as if I could make myself disappear by sheer will. There was one night I will never forget. I was sick with a fever, my body aching, my skin hot to the touch. My mother had gone to bed early and I was lying on the couch wrapped in a blanket. He came into the room and stood over me without saying a word. The sound of the clock filled the silence. I remember the way his shadow fell across my face and the cold of his hand when he touched my forehead. It was not a gesture of care. It was a reminder that even in my weakest moments, I was not beyond his reach. The psychological games were as damaging as the physical. He would praise me in front of others, making it seem as though we had the perfect relationship. Then later, he would find ways to remind me that my silence was the only thing keeping me safe. He made me believe that no one would believe me if I spoke out. He would say things like, "You know how people look up to me, or think about what would happen to this family if you told lies." These words worked their way into my mind until they became a constant echo. Isolation became his most effective tool. He discouraged me from spending time with friends and questioned me about anyone I spoke to. Slowly, my world shrank until the walls of our home were all I knew. The outside world felt distant, almost unreachable. I began to doubt whether anyone would notice if something happened to me. That was exactly how he wanted it. Living in that kind of fear creates a kind of hyper-awareness. I could sense his mood from the way he closed a door or the way he set down a glass. I could tell if danger was coming from the speed of his breathing or the angle of his smile. These details became my survival system, the only defense I had in a place where I had no power. Every day felt like walking across thin ice, knowing that one wrong step could make everything collapse. And yet I moved carefully through that frozen surface because I knew if I fell through, there would be no one to pull me out. It was a teacher who first began to look at me as though she could see past the mask I wore every day. Her name was Mrs. Carter, and she had a way of making the classroom feel like a place where the outside world could not reach. She never raised her voice, but her words carried weight, and her eyes paid attention in a way most adults never did. She noticed details. The way my sleeves were always tugged down over my wrists, even when the classroom was warm. The way I startled at sudden noises. The way my smile seemed to fade too quickly when I thought no one was watching. One afternoon, she handed back our assignments, and instead of moving on to the next student, she paused in front of my desk. She placed her hand lightly over mine and asked if I was all right. It was a simple question, but it felt like the air had been pulled from the room. My first instinct was to nod and say yes. That was the answer I had been trained to give. But the warmth of her hand and the steadiness in her gaze made something in me hesitate. I wanted to tell her everything, but the words felt trapped somewhere deep in my throat. So I said nothing, and she did not push. She just gave a small nod as though to tell me she had heard what I did not say. After that, she seemed to find excuses to keep me behind after class. Sometimes it was to help clean the chalkboard or to go over a math problem I had already solved. Other times it was just to ask about my weekend or what book I was reading. These conversations were small, but they felt different. In her presence, I did not feel the constant need to watch every door and window. It was not safety exactly, but it was the closest thing to it I had felt in a long time. I began to notice how she studied me when she thought I was not paying attention. Her brow would furrow just slightly as if she were working through a puzzle. Once during recess, she sat beside me on the steps instead of standing with the other teachers. She told me she had grown up in a house that was not always kind. She did not give details, but there was something in the way she said it that made me believe her. For the first time, I realized there were adults who might understand more than I thought. At home, the tension was still the same. The footsteps in the hallway, the deliberate silences, the small cruelties that piled up like stones in my chest. But now there was a seed of something else in me. I did not have a word for it then, but I know now it was the first flicker of hope. It was fragile and easily smothered, but it was there. When I saw Mrs. Carter in the mornings greeting us at the door, it was like a small light reminding me that not every adult in my world was willing to look away. The day that changed everything began like any other. We were working on an art project, cutting colored paper into shapes for a bulletin board. My hands were steady, but my mind was far away, thinking about the evening ahead and the sound of the front door opening. Mrs. Carter walked past my table and noticed a faint bruise on my forearm when my sleeve slipped up. She did not say anything in front of the others, but after class, she asked me to stay. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the overhead lights. She sat across from me, her hands folded on the desk, and said my name softly. I felt my throat tighten before she even spoke again. She asked if someone had hurt me. It was the first time anyone had asked the question so directly. I stared at the desk and my eyes began to sting. I shook my head, but she did not look convinced. She told me she believed something was wrong and that I did not have to be alone in it. Her voice was calm but certain. She said she could help me. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to let the words spill out and tell her everything, but I had been warned so many times about what would happen if I spoke. His voice echoed in my mind, reminding me that no one would believe me, that I would be blamed, that everything I knew would be torn apart. My hands trembled under the desk, and I could not make my mouth form the truth. But in that moment something shifted. I realized she was not going to look away. In the days that followed, she kept a closer watch on me. She asked gentle questions without pressing too hard. She gave me extra work in the library so I could spend time away from the others if I wanted to. I began to notice that when she was nearby, I felt less trapped. She never told me exactly what she was thinking, but I could sense she was waiting for me to reach a point where I was ready. I cannot remember the exact moment I decided to trust her. Maybe it was not a single moment at all, but a series of them. The way she noticed when I flinched at sudden noises. The way she never made promises she could not keep. The way she spoke to me, as if I mattered. All of it combined until one day, the fear of staying silent became heavier than the fear of speaking. And when that balance shifted, everything in my world began to move with it. The plan to leave did not happen overnight. It began in whispers and glances, in the quiet understanding between myself and Mrs. Carter that something had to change. She started by giving me small lifelines, a note with her home phone number tucked into the corner of my notebook, a quiet reminder that her door was always open, a lingering look that told me she had not forgotten what I could not say out loud. At home, the walls felt closer than ever. Every sound carried through the thin rooms, the front door closing, the clink of silverware in the kitchen, the steady rhythm of footsteps on the hallway floorboards. But now, instead of only dread, I carried a hidden knowledge. Someone knew enough to help me. That awareness became my anchor. It was fragile, but it was mine. The day it finally happened was gray and cold. The air felt heavier than usual, and there was a sharpness to every sound. I remember pulling my coat tight around me as I left for school, my breath clouding in the morning air. My stomach twisted the whole walk there, as if my body already knew this would be the day everything changed. Mrs. Carter pulled me aside after lunch. She said she wanted to show me something in the library. I followed her without question, my heart pounding in my ears. When the door closed behind us, she knelt so her eyes met mine. She told me she had spoken with someone she trusted and that there was a safe place for me to go. She said I would not have to go back to that house tonight if I did not want to. The weight of those words settled over me like a blanket. For a moment I could not breathe. Part of me wanted to run, to hide, to go back to the routine I knew, no matter how painful it was. The unknown was terrifying, but I thought of the countless nights I had spent lying awake, waiting for the sound of footsteps, and I realized I could not do it anymore. I nodded, barely able to speak. The hours that followed are a blur in my memory. I remember sitting in the principal's office, the hum of the heater filling the silence. I remember a woman with kind eyes and a warm coat introducing herself as someone from social services. I remember the way she spoke to me, not like a problem to be solved, but like a person. I remember the fear of stepping into her car and looking back at the school as it disappeared behind us. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without the sound of his footsteps outside my door. The bed was strange, and the room unfamiliar, but the air felt lighter. I woke up to sunlight instead of dread, and I could breathe without bracing for what might come next. The days that followed were not easy. Leaving did not erase the past. It did not undo the harm. There were questions from strangers, papers to sign, moments when I wanted to go back simply because it was what I knew. But with each day away from that house, I began to understand what freedom felt like. It was not loud or overwhelming. It was quiet, steady, like the slow return of a voice I thought I had lost forever. Mrs. Carter visited me when she could. She brought books and listened to me talk about things that had nothing to do with my past. She reminded me that I was more than what had been done to me, that I could build a life on my own terms. Those words planted themselves deep in me, and over the years, they grew roots. I eventually learned how to laugh again without looking over my shoulder. I learned to trust small moments of joy, the smell of fresh bread baking, the feeling of warm sunlight on my face, the comfort of a locked door that no one had the right to open. These were things I never took for granted. The scars remained, both seen and unseen, but they no longer defined me. They became part of my story, not the whole of it. And in telling that story now, I hope it reaches someone who needs to hear it, someone who is lying awake at night thinking there is no way out, someone who believes no one will believe them. I want them to know that silence does not have to be forever. There are people who will see you, people who will fight for you, people who will help you open a door you thought was locked forever. To Mrs. Carter, wherever she may be, I owe more than words can hold. She was the first person to believe me without proof, the first to offer a way forward without demanding that I be anything other than who I was. Her kindness became the bridge between the life I was trapped in and the life I have now. And to you, watching this right now, I want to thank you for listening to my story. It is not easy to share, and it is not easy to hear, but these truths matter. They remind us that behind closed doors, there are lives being shaped in silence, and sometimes all it takes to change one is the courage to see it. If this story has touched you, stay with us. There is another story on your screen now, one that I believe you need to hear. Click and let it take you where it needs to, because every story carries a piece of strength we can pass on.